Week 10 is here and the quarterback board is tighter than ever, and there's a few big names heating up, others are cooling off, and there's some sneaky streamers that are starting to climb into the conversation. So let's break down the signal callers that you can count on for Week 10. What's up, Headliner Nation? My name is Brad, the Rankings King, and before we dive into this week's rankings, just a reminder that these are the consensus rankings from the Headliners team. For more detailed analysis, make sure to check out the start-sit videos already posted on the channel this week. If you want even more breakdowns each week, join the Fantasy Headliners community by hitting that join button below. That's going to get you access to extra rankings like flex, kicker, defense, and an exclusive spot inside of our Discord. Now, before we head into this week's rankings, we've got a few hits and misses from week number 9. Our first hit was Justin Herbert, and we ranked Herbert all the way up in top 5 last week, and he finished at QB4. Next up was Matthew Stafford, and Stafford was ranked all the way up at QB7, and he finished at QB8. And next up was Drake May, and despite all the haters online saying that May was too low last week, we had him in tier 2, and he was a tier 2 quarterback on week 9. Okay, so there's our hits, but what about our misses? And we start with Dak Prescott, and apparently Dallas is the only team that can make Arizona look like a Super Bowl contender. We had Dak way too high, though, and that's for sure. Next up is Geno Smith, and what do you want me to do here? We'll take this miss because he hasn't shown any reason for us to trust him any higher in the rankings. And next up is Daniel Jones, and he didn't have a bad game at all, but we had him at the bottom of tier 1, and he finished at QB 17. All right, so there you have it. Let's turn the page to week 10. In tier 1, we've got Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Drake May, Jalen Hurts, Bo Nix, Jackson Dart, and Justin Herbert. At number 1, we've got Josh Allen, and he's the QB4 on the season, and he's already scored 23 fantasy points on his Miami team back in week 3. There's no reason to think that anything different happens this week. At number 2, we've got Lamar Jackson. It was great to see Lamar back in week 9, and he looked totally dialed in. No QB in the NFL is averaging more fantasy points per game than Lamar at 24, and now we get to Minnesota defense that struggled to stop the pass as of late. At 3, we've got Drake May, and this isn't an easy matchup for May, but that hasn't seemed to matter for most of the year. He's had multiple touchdown games in 7 of his last 9 games this year, and he's only scored less than 16 fantasy points one time this year. At number 4, we have Jalen Hurts, and he's coming off of the bye, and he hasn't scored less than 19 points in a game since week 2. Now, the rushing production is down over the last month, but in that same time frame, he's had 10 passing touchdowns, and this is going to be the biggest test for Green Bay that they've had in a while. At number 5, we have Bo Nix, and Bo continues to be hot. He's now scored 19 plus fantasy points in 3 straight. The running game in Denver is struggling, and now he gets a matchup against the Raiders, who allow almost 18 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. At number 6, we have Jackson Dart, and this kid continues to produce the most while having the least. No high-end weapons at his disposal, but he's scored 19 plus fantasy points in 4 straight games. And now he gets a matchup against Chicago, who allows the 6th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. At number 7, we have Justin Herbert, and he's one of the hottest quarterbacks in fantasy. He scored at least 26 fantasy points in 3 straight games, and he's all the way up to QB2 overall on the season. He now gets a Pittsburgh defense that allows over 21 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. All right, that's it for tier 1. And before we head into the next tier, I want to make sure that you're all hooked up on Underdog. You already know that we're crushing those player pick'ems on Underdog this year, so what are you waiting for? Head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app. Create a new account using the referral code HEADLINERS when you do so. Then just make your initial deposit and come join a contest. And if you sign up with that promo code, again, it's HEADLINERS, you'll get access to all of the promos that Underdog offers weekly. Check this out. When you play your first $5, they're going to give you $100 in bonus funds. So you play 5, you get 100. It's that easy. And don't forget, Jake is going to be breaking down the best picks weekly in our show on Fridays, and links to join are in the description, and we look forward to playing with you this week. All right, let's move it on to tier 2. We have Caleb Williams, Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff, Baker Mayfield, Daniel Jones, and Sam Darnold. At number 8, we have Caleb Williams, and Caleb may be the most hated top 10 fantasy quarterback. The problem is his ceiling is extremely high and his floor can be extremely low, which means it's best to play him in good matchups, like this one against New York, who allows the 7th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. At number 9, we have Matthew Stafford, and it sounds like Puka Nacua escaped injury, which means that Stafford has the chance to go cray-cray once again in Week 10. He's scored at least 25 fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games, and he torched San Francisco a few weeks ago. At number 10, we have Jared Goff, and Goff is the equivalent of driving a Lambo through a school zone. He's capable of so much, but it's just not needed all of the time. But this is a great matchup going up against Washington, who allows the 4th most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. At number 11, we've got Baker Mayfield, and does he get Bucky Irving and Chris Godwin back this week? And that's the question. He has definitely struggled as of late due to all the injuries on offense, and he could use them. Patriots defensive back Christian Gonzalez is also questionable to play, so that could help this week. At number 12, we've got Daniel Jones, and Daniel Jones is like the Toe Mater of fantasy football. He's not flashy, but he gets the job done. He's going to hover in between 17 and 22 fantasy points on most weeks. This week, it just depends on which Atlanta defense shows up to the game. At number 13, we've got Sam Darnold, and Sam Darnold just got himself another weapon in Rashid Shaheed, and that gives one of the most consistent quarterbacks on the season another deep threat. The Arizona defense is playing great, but it's going to be hard for them to contain all of the weapons in Seattle. All right, that's it for Tier 2. Let's turn the page to Tier 3. We have Mac Jones, Jacoby Brissett, Jordan Love, J.J. McCarthy, Marcus Mariota, Justin Fields, and Michael Penix Jr. At number 14, we have Mac Jones, and we all remember what Mac Jones did against this Rams defense a few weeks ago. 342 passing yards and 2 touchdowns to go with a win in overtime. And with the way he's playing right now, it's hard to not include him inside of the top 20. At number 15, we've got Jacoby Brissett, and Kyler will miss extended time. Brissett is one of the hottest quarterbacks in football right now, and he's got 7 total touchdowns over the last 3 games. This week against Seattle may be the most difficult test yet, but they struggle against tight ends, and Brissett has Trey McBride. At number 16, we have Jordan Love, and last week Jordan Love lost Kraft and Golden, and this was already an offense not overly reliant on its passing game. And in a matchup against Philadelphia, they're going to want to keep the ball away from Philly by running the ball as much as possible. At 17, we have J.J. McCarthy, and on paper, this looks like a great matchup for J.J. Baltimore allows the 9th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks on the season, but they are much healthier now, and they looked a lot better in Week 9, so tamp down your expectations. At number 18, we have Marcus Mariota, and this Washington offense has been a mess for most of the season, and Mariota will have the job for the foreseeable future, and due to their lack of ability to run the football, they're going to have to throw it against Detroit this week. At number 19, we have Justin Fields, and, well, the Jets traded away a ton of players, leaving Fields, Wilson, and Hall as the last men standing. This is obviously a team in full tank mode, and now they get a difficult matchup going up against Cleveland, who's coming off of their bye week. At number 20, we have Michael Penix Jr. going into Indianapolis, and the Colts just added defensive back Sauce Gardner, which will definitely boost their defensive presence, but Penix may have the highest ceiling of all the remaining quarterbacks, and that's why he sneaks inside of the top 20. He's just going to have to get lucky on a couple of big plays. So there you go. There's your tiers 1, 2, and 3 in the quarterback position. We've got a couple of guys on the outside looking in Bryce Young, Tua Tagovailoa, Trevor Lawrence, and Geno Smith. And that wraps up the quarterback rankings for Week 10. And so who's leading your fantasy lineup this week? Is it one of the elite arms, or are you rolling the dice on a sleeper? Drop your picks in the comments, smash that like button, and make sure that you're subscribed for all of the latest rankings and fantasy breakdowns. Headliner Nation, let's go get a W.
Analytics off the chain, all the channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game.